Can you start off by just telling us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is deCoriolis. I'm the executive director of FarmForward. We're a nonprofit focused on animal agriculture and reforming the way in which we raise animals for food.
Um, awesome. So can you expand a bit about what FarmForward does?
Yeah, FarmForward promotes conscientious food choices that are focused on reducing farmed animal suffering and promoting sustainable agriculture. And our work spans a really broad range of work, everything from public policy at state and federal level to working with the largest food companies, food and farm companies in the country to improve their practices on animal welfare, to working with the media and trying to tell different stories about how we raise animals and the way in which meat and dairy and animal products, the role that those foods play in our diets.
Awesome. Thank you. So why is FarmForward committed to reducing antibiotic use in food animals?
Antibiotic use in animal agriculture is really a modern and a recent invention. Only in the last more or less half century has the use of antibiotics proliferated on animal farms. And the kinds of farming that we have today, which is really dominated by confinement, industrial scale farming with hundreds of millions or in some cases billions of animals being raised in tight confined conditions. That system is the result in many ways of the use of antibiotics and antimicrobials. That kinds of farming really evolved in tandem with this growing use of ever growing scale and type of antibiotics and antimicrobials on farms. So you can't, for example, keep tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of genetically identical chickens in tight confinement in a barn for their entire lives and do that in a way that's going to keep them healthy unless you're using drugs. And so the evolution of modern, especially poultry and pig farming, is really a story about antibiotics and antimicrobials in many ways. And so FarmForward is committed to reducing the use of these drugs as part of a holistic effort to change the way in which animals are raised for food. So, we want to see, everything from the kinds of, barns and housing systems animal raised in to the kinds of genetics that are used, the kinds of breeding that we do and to make sure that animals are healthy and are raised in conditions that can promote health, that don't rely on, antibiotics and antimicrobials as sort of a key part of keeping them alive.
You kind of already touched on this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, because maybe it'll lead us into a different
Yeah.
spot. Why does antibiotic use matter in the effort to improve animal welfare?
Yeah, improving animal welfare fundamentally requires that we rethink the role that animals play in our food system. And right now, most of the animal agriculture industry is set up in ways to maximize the profitability and production of those animal products, often at the cost of things like animal welfare, public health, environmental sustainability, et cetera. And so when FarmForward is focused on improving welfare, we want to do that from sort of a holistic perspective. We want to see animals raised in ways that promote health broadly. And you can't really do that without addressing antibiotics. Yeah, so improving animal welfare holistically requires addressing the use of antibiotics. You can't really improve animal welfare from the ground up unless you begin to address the conditions under which animals are raised and the genetics of these animals that are being used in most commercial operations. And so, addressing animal welfare fundamentally requires that you address the use of antibiotics and the conditions that require them.
Beautiful. Thank you. So how do you think that we can engage more people in calling for an end to overuse and misuse of antibiotics in factory farm?
I think the public and consumers already care a lot about the way in which antibiotics are used in farming. And we see this when we look at the trends in the meat industry, for example, and you see the antibiotic-free and organic and natural meat industries as the fastest growing segment of the meat industry. And that's for good reason. Consumers are concerned about the use of and overuse of antibiotics on animal farms. They're concerned about their health. They're concerned about public health. They're concerned about animal welfare. And so they're seeking out alternatives. For FarmForward, one of the things that's really important to us is to ensure that those labels like antibiotic-free or animal welfare certified, that those labels are meaningful and that consumers are actually getting what it is that they pay for when they seek out those products. And so part of our focus over the last couple of years has been on this growing trend that we describe as humane washing, which is the use of marketing claims like raised without antibiotics or animal welfare certified, while not really changing the underlying practices that are causing the use of antibiotics and antimicrobials. And so our work over the last couple of years has included a real focus on what these labels mean, whether or not a label like antibiotic-free is really ensuring the kinds of practices that consumers want. And then we're pushing the government and companies to adopt testing technologies and other practices to really ensure, to verify, to test and make sure that the claims that companies are making are true. So that way, when consumers go to the grocery store and are seeking out a product that is raised without antibiotics or animal welfare certified or USDA organic, that they can really trust that those products came from animals who were raised without antibiotics.
Perfect. Thank you. I've got one more question for you. What is the one thing that people can do to actually help battle superbugs?
So for consumers who are concerned about antibiotic resistance and want to do something to fight superbugs, I think the most important action people can take is to look seriously at the connections between antibiotic overuse and factory farming, industrial animal agriculture. And when I think you look at those systems closely, you understand that they're really inextricably linked, and that to solve the superbug crisis, we're going to have to fundamentally alter the way in which we raise animals for food. And the consequences of that are going to be that we have to raise many fewer animals for food. And we're going to have to all eat less meat and fewer dairy products. And for consumers who want to start taking action on that, they can start to shift their diet. They can make plant-based foods the center of their plate. They can start to shift how they eat to default towards plant-based foods. Doesn't mean you have to go vegan or even vegetarian, but starting to shift your diet and encourage the institutions in your lives, the schools and businesses that you are part of, to start to make changes in those directions ultimately are going to be critical to reducing the overall demand for animal products, which is why superbugs have emerged. Yeah, I mean, FarmForward has a long history of working with institutions, universities and schools and hospitals to help them think differently about the kinds of food that they serve and the kinds of animal products that they source. And what we find is that it's very often the people who are served by those institutions who are the most impactful advocates, that they are the ones who can go to a dining service director or go to a school board meeting and say, hey, we want to see school food done differently. We want to see we want to make sure that we're serving healthy, sustainable meals. And part of that includes, making sure that we're, again, centering plants on our plates, and we're reducing animal consumption. And when we do buy animal products, they're coming from farms who are not using antibiotics routinely. And so, those are changes that are underway in schools and businesses across the country. And much of that is driven by concerned parents and employees. And so, if you're part of an institution that is serving food or serving your kids food, it's an opportunity for you to get engaged. And there are lots of great organizations out there that can help you, be an advocate in your community. But ultimately, it comes down to, showing up and asking questions and encouraging those institutions to make progress in the right direction. The overuse of antibiotics on animal farms is a problem that we've known about for almost half a century now. The first evidence coming out about how the overuse of antibiotics on farms would lead to resistance is well established. Governments have known about this since the 1970s. The FDA and the other sort of government agencies that regulate animal farming know that this is a problem and continue to delay or fail to take the kind of decisive action that's going to be necessary to curb the use of antibiotics on farms. And so, our public policymakers, our elected representatives play a critical role in addressing this problem. Consumers can only do so much, and ultimately we need concerted collective effort from our representatives in government. And the FDA, instead of, for example, simply making voluntary action or encouraging companies to disclose the kinds of antibiotics that are being used on farms, we can just make real requirements. We can decide as a country that we're going to address this problem head on, and that we're going to require the food animal companies that are raising meat and poultry to do better. And that's a role that we should push governments to play.